Welcome to the Simpler Business Podcast, where we talk about ways to do what you love and serve your people in a way that brings you income and freedom. I'm your host, Marissa Roberts. Join me as I chat with my favorite entrepreneurs about how they simplify their biz so that you can simplify yours. How is your computer looking right now? Can you find what you need in a couple of clicks? Or do you spend a ton of time looking through files and folders, trying to get a hold of something important that you know you've saved somewhere, but you just can't remember where or even what the file name is? You'll be pleased to know there's actually a way you can simplify your approach to storing and retrieving your digital information, and you don't have to do anywhere near as much organizing as you think to make this a really, really smooth process that's easy to action. A lot of us slip into a habit of filing digital things that can much more easily just be searched for. You don't have to micromanage your files like we did 10 or 15 years ago, as long as you're naming your files right. And when you start to think of finding as the goal, not filing as the goal, you can start being smarter in how you name your files and how or whether you label emails. So they don't need to be filed, they just need to be found. Now, I know this is outside the realm of usual thinking for most of us, so I've got someone on the show today who's going to make this so easy to understand and implement. My guest today is a Google Tools Pro and master of improving efficiency through digital organization. Dara Sklar is like a tech-savvy Monica Geller, but a lot less demanding and shrill. She's the friend that you call for tech help. Dara is happy to jump in and show you time-saving tips and hacks that you'll wish you knew sooner. And using her in-depth knowledge of Google tools to help business owners work more efficiently, Dara can identify the behind-the-scenes disorganization that's slowing your business growth, ruining your ability to delegate, and eating up time you don't have. If you're already using Google Workspace, and I certainly do, I use Gmail, Google Drive, Docs, Sheets, Forms, Dara can show you how to use it in a way that's more organized with less work, so things can flow smoothly in your business while you focus on doing the stuff that you love and the stuff that makes you more money. Dara, welcome. I am so excited that you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very pleased to be on your podcast.
Oh, this is going to be awesome because I know how organized you are with your digital stuff. And it just kind of speaks to my heart because I am a lover of organizing things. But I have to admit, I'm a bit of a lazy organizer. I like things to be just so that I can use them smoothly and easily. But I'm not really a fan of putting in a ton of effort at the start to get things set up in a way that works better, if you know what I mean. I'm a little on the lazy side. And I think a lot of our listeners out there too kind of know what it's like to feel overwhelmed at the idea of setting up things a certain way. And then they procrastinate on that because of the overwhelm. Do you find that in your experience as well?
Oh, definitely. And I think the solution that I came up with facing that exact same statement over and over again, because like in my heart, I just want everybody to tidy up their files. And what I realized was that the thing that was stopping most people was trying to tidy up the past as opposed to working towards the future. And I had this epiphany one day where I gave a group of people the suggestion that they kind of take everything that was a mess and hide it away so that it doesn't stare at them and nag them. And then just to say, okay, who am I today? What's my business like today? What do I need today? And what system, now knowing what I know now, what system do I want moving forward? Mm-hmm. And if you were to set up your folder structure or the labels in your email, if you set it up today without the nagging backlog of the mess you created up till today, what would you do? And so then we mapped that out, and it was easy because you're not thinking about what you did before and the fact that now you're going to have to go clean it. So we set up this whole new system, and I said, okay, and now you have your old stuff, and it's like one click away, but it is out of sight, out of mind. And anytime you think you need something, you go to the old and you bring it into your new system. But probably 80 to 90% of the time, we don't need the archives, right?
Yeah.
You need things maybe in case of an audit or when you're pulling, referring to something that you did last year. But for the most part, if you created a mess, you don't have to clean it before you can be a better version of yourself.
Yeah, that takes so much pressure off because I think, when we're talking about overwhelm when it comes to digital information, do you think that it's a case of, yes, people feel overwhelmed because of all of the stuff they've already got, but also do you think that that kind of starts because when we start our businesses, when we start building our files and we start doing things, it's like we don't have a system yet because we're right at the start of our business. And then cut to 5-10 years later, we're like, okay, now I know how I want to manage things. But yeah, that big bulk of things in the background that you're like, oh, I don't want to touch it. I'm already too busy. It's too much to go through. Yeah, that's really relatable.
It's like the analogy of like building the rocket ship while you're flying, in that, you're starting your business, and what is the lowest priority thing is what's going on behind the scenes, because unless you're the kind of person who like can't move forward without a system in place, which is some of us, but it's not most people's default. And I think what happens is they're just like, oh, client. And that was my experience as well, which was I was so busy doing client work that I created a complete mess behind the scenes of my business. And it wasn't until I was like ready to delegate and hire someone, and I realized that I was going to be the bottleneck if I didn't do something and put some systems in place. And then the massive relief that I felt when I was able to be organized enough to hand it off to someone validated the time and effort that I took behind the scenes. But I couldn't do it until I was ready. And I think that that's also very natural.
Yeah, I agree. You totally nailed it with that whole feeling of I'm ready to delegate the work, but I'm not ready to delegate I'm not ready to start the delegation because of all the mess in the background. Yeah. And I think that's so true for so many entrepreneurs, so many business owners, so many people in that sort of 3 to 5 year range of their business where they're like, right, the ball is rolling, things are picking up momentum wise. I'm ready to hire a team member. Oh my God, how am I going to get them access to everything? How am I going to get them to find stuff? It's going to be
I don't want them to see this.
I don't want them to log in and look at my folders. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Especially for someone like me who, I'm known for being an organized person, but if you could see my computer, not so good, especially in the first few years of my business.
Yeah. And, right before we started recording, we had this conversation about how easily we could find things. But I think, this is exactly the point of this episode is you were able to find what you were looking for in an instant. And it doesn't matter what your background on your computer looks like. If you've got files everywhere, if you know how to find that file, like in an instant, that's all that matters. It's not about, when you think about like houses and how they look staged and beautiful and no one lives like that. Like that's true. But behind those beautiful staged houses are closets where you open the closet and you pull out the thing you need. It doesn't matter if the closet's messy. The door is closed. Nobody's looking at it. And as long as you know where to find that item or file or email. And this is why I recommended this topic for our conversation today was because we so pervasively use Google Drive and Gmail and Google Calendar and all of the accessories that come with a Google account. And we sometimes forget, especially if we've come over from another piece of software like Outlook from, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I know that was the case for me, is we forget that the foundation of those products is actually search. Like we use Google as a verb, and yet we come into our email and I find people who are like clicking on a label and then scrolling down this list trying to find something. There's a search bar. And not only is there a search bar, but there are like fancy advanced ways that you can search and advanced searches that you can do. But like there's even, there are layers to the way that you can search for emails. And it's amazing once you master that and once you start thinking in those terms, how much of a weight gets lifted off your shoulders because you're never ever filing anything worrying about whether you're going to find it, because instead you go and you name it appropriately if it's a file, or you label it appropriately if it's an email, if you even need to label it at all, depending on volume of email and volume of files. But it's just amazing when you start thinking about the capabilities of search within those programs, how actually freeing it can be, because now no longer are we forced. It's not like a filing cabinet where there's only one place that you can find it. You can keep asking the computer, hey, no, that's not what I was looking for. Let's keep digging, and then it'll find it for you. And it's just awesome once you have that breakthrough.
That's so true. And nobody thinks of that. No, I certainly didn't. So is that what you mean when you talk about finding, not filing? That searching for something is really the key, that using the search bar is really the key of making that work and making it a lot easier.
That's exactly it, but it's working your way backwards. So instead of thinking, where am I going to put this? You think, how am I going to name this so that the future me can find it?
Oh, yeah.
And so it's you're working backwards. And I do this all the time because I'm always thinking, like, how can I make tomorrow easier for myself? How can I, there's this Seinfeld bit. I even refer to this inside of one of my courses where I like show the 45 seconds of Seinfeld explaining this. But he says there's like morning guy and night guy. And night guy just always wants to, be selfish and, go to bed without shaving or showering or, ironing the shirt or whatever. And morning guy is always cursing night guy for having been so selfish. And what I try and teach is just this concept of like, how am I going to look for this in the future? What can I do to Dara a year from now when I go to do my taxes next year? And I know I'm going to need this document. How can I best help future Dara? Mm-hmm. And then react accordingly. And it's actually really helpful because there's no one right way to do it. Each of us has in our own brains, like a way. I often say to myself, like, what would I have done? Oh. And that's how I find things.
Yeah. I think for me, I would be doing it like, what would I search for if I wanted to find this again? Like exactly. What would I just off the top of my head, not what's the best thing to name it. That's very different, isn't it? What's the best thing to name it is not necessarily what I'm going to search for later. So really, How does my brain work? Yeah.
Yes. And if we're talking specifically about naming files, and let's say you come up with 2 or 3 ways that you might search for something. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe you do all 3 of those things. Maybe you put it in a full, let's say we're talking about like photos, and you could use photo or headshot or portrait as 3 different words. And you're like, this is what I might search for, but maybe you could name it all 3 things. And then you could also put it in a folder. You're like, maybe I'll look in a folder. Like you can do as much as you want to help that future self. But the moment you start looking at it through that lens, mm-hmm. the moment, like I can't tell you the number of times, and I actually have people say the same thing to me, but I do this to myself, is like, I'm constantly like thanking past Dara for the thoughtfulness of what I've done. It's like putting chapstick in all the pockets of all of your jackets and purses. Yeah. And you're just like, every time I reach into the right pocket, I'm like, oh, I'm so thankful to having been so thoughtful. And it's the same thing when you go and file an email, or even like, let's say you get tax paperwork throughout the year, right? You've got 12 months. And then at a certain point you go to do your taxes. Well, instead of pushing it off for later, you don't be night guy. You say, okay, I'm going to create a label today that says taxes 2023. Mm-hmm. And then every single time all year long that something comes in, you immediately tag it. And that way it's just done. And it's not an accumulation that you're going to dread and ignore, and that's going to cause you anxiety.
Yeah. And the fact that you're doing it on a regular basis means it's easy to remember. You kind of get into that flow. Yeah, that's a really good, I'm already thinking of ways I